Welcome back to the Rekindling the Legacy podcast. I'm Professor Andrew Davis.
And I'm Dr. Juhi Gupta.
And this podcast is brought to you by the Inclusive Futures Foundation. We are a national NGO based in India that is working with women and children's rights and education, healthcare, the environment and culture. Go and learn more about our work by visiting our website, which is theinclusivefuturesfoundation.com.
Today, we are exploring the remarkable life of a woman whose political journey began when she was just 16 years old and who would go on to break barriers on both the national and international stage.
We are talking today about Vijaya Laxmi Pandit, a name that deserves far more recognition than it typically receives. Born Subhadra Kumari Nehru in 1900, she was part of one of India's most politically influential families, but she carved out her own extraordinary path.
That's right, Andrew. And what strikes me immediately is how she attended her first political meeting at just 16. This wasn't someone who came to politics later in life. This was a young woman who was politically conscious from the very beginning.
Absolutely. And the family context is fascinating here. Her father, Motilal Nehru, was a prominent lawyer and former president of the Indian National Congress. Her elder brother was Jawaharlal Nehru, who went on to become India's first prime minister. But Vijaya Laxmi wasn't content to simply exist in their shadows.
No, she certainly wasn't. In fact, she achieved something quite remarkable. She became the first woman to be part of a cabinet before India even gained independence. Think about what that means in the context of the 1930s and 1940s.
She was imprisoned 4 times by the British government for her involvement in the freedom struggle in 1932, 1933, 1940 and 1942. That's not passive participation, that's active resistance.
And let's talk about her philosophy, because this is where her legacy becomes truly compelling. She had this remarkable quote where she said, and I quote, "It is not only the aspect of womanhood which concerns us today, but that of manhood as well. The two are not separate, as some people would have us believe, and we cannot place them in different compartments and deal with them separately," unquote.
Juhi, that's incredibly progressive thinking for the time, isn't it? She's essentially arguing against the compartmentalization of gender issues. She's seeing equality as a holistic concern rather than separate battles.
Exactly, and this wasn't just theoretical for her. In 1937, she became part of the provincial legislature in the United Provinces. But here's what I find particularly principled about her. In 1939, she resigned from her cabinet position to protest Britain's decision to force Indians to participate in World War II without consultation.
That's a crucial detail. It shows she was willing to sacrifice political power for principle. And then again in 1942, during the Quit India movement, she was imprisoned yet again alongside other Congress leaders.
The personal tragedy that followed is heartbreaking. In 1944, her husband Ranjit Sitaram Pandit was imprisoned and subsequently died. This deeply affected her. But rather than retreating from public life, she seemed to channel that grief into even greater determination.
And that determination became particularly obvious as we moved towards one of the most significant moments in her career, the 1945 San Francisco Conference on the Charter of the United Nations. She wasn't there officially, but she certainly made her voice heard in a very powerful way.
Oh, this is such a defining moment. She was frustrated with how India was being represented as merely a British colony. So she spoke up and said, "I desire to make it clear that the so-called Indian representatives attending the conference have not the slightest representative capacity, no sanction, no mandate from any of the responsible groups in India, and are merely nominees of the British government.
That takes remarkable courage to essentially call out the entire official Indian delegation at an international forum. She was saying their votes meant nothing because they didn't represent the Indian people.
And then in 1947, something extraordinary happened. She became India's ambassador to the Soviet Union. Imagine being a woman diplomat in the 1940s, representing a newly independent nation.
But perhaps her most historic achievement came in 1953 when she became the first woman president of the United Nations General Assembly. Think about the symbolism there. A woman from a newly independent nation leading the world's premier international body.
From 1946 to 1968, she headed Indian delegations to the UN, and everywhere she went, she spoke about the impact of imperialism and colonialism. She was carrying India's voice to the world stage.
And there's a beautiful quote from her from 1947 when she spoke about India's global responsibilities. She said, "An independent India would no doubt assume leadership not only of Asia, but of the world. And so when we meet here in this assembly to draw up the future constitution of our country, we must not forget that it is not only to ourselves we owe a duty, but also to the world which looks to us."
That's visionary thinking, Andrew. She's seeing India not just as a newly independent nation focused inward, but as having global responsibilities and leadership potential.
From 1962 to 1964, she also served as governor of Maharashtra. But then something interesting happened in her relationship with the Nehru family legacy.
Yes, she became very critical of Indira Gandhi's declaration of emergency in India. She said Indira made a travesty of democracy in India. This led to a complete break. She retired in 1977 due to her sour relationship with Indira Gandhi.
But even then, she didn't just fade away. She actually helped the Janata Party win elections, and in 1979 represented India in the UN Human Rights Commission before finally fully retiring from public life.
And what I find remarkable about Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit is how she consistently chose principle over convenience. Whether it was resigning from her cabinet position, speaking truth at international forums, or breaking with family over democratic principles.
And throughout all this time, she was intellectually engaged as well. She was a great writer. She wrote The Evolution of India in 1958 and her autobiography, The Scope of Happiness, a personal memoir, in 1979. Indeed, back in 1939, she'd already published an essay called So I Became a Minister, which gave us insight into her own political journey of that time.
Her legacy challenges us to think about what political leadership can look like. Here was someone who combined activism with diplomacy, principle with pragmatism, and personal courage with public service.
Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit died in 1990 in Dehradun, but her example remains relevant today. In an era where we're still fighting for gender equality and still questioning the impacts of colonialism and imperialism, her voice feels remarkably contemporary.
What strikes me most about Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit is that she refused to be defined by the men in her family, however illustrious they were. She created her own path and her own legacy.
She attended her first political meeting at 16 and spent the next 7 decades fighting for justice, equality, and for India's place in the world. That's a life dedicated to public service.
And perhaps most importantly, she understood that the fight for equality, whether based on gender, religion, caste, or race, was interconnected. She saw these not as separate battles, but as part of a larger struggle for human dignity.
So that is a summary of the life of Vijaya Laxmi Pandit, freedom fighter, diplomat, cabinet minister, UNGA president, and a voice that refused to be silenced. A legacy, Juhi, truly worth rekindling.
That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Rekindling the Legacy. Until next time, keep exploring the stories that shaped our world.
And if you've enjoyed this story, then why not subscribe to our channel to make sure you don't miss an episode. See you soon.